Welcome to today's episode of the Working Wisdom podcast series, brought to you by the C.T. Bauer College of Business at the University of Houston. We're having a conversation about work-life balance, how to navigate and overcome challenges within your career, and how to make business more accommodating to a diverse workforce.
Welcome to another episode of How Does She Do It? My name is Alejandro Sanoja, and I was invited to host this episode because I also, like Lola, graduated from the MBA program at the C.T. Bauer College of Business. So our guest, as you might already guess, is Lola Soyebo. She graduated from the Bauer MBA program at the top of her class in 2016. She was president of the NAMBA chapter, and that chapter won the student chapter of the year. And she also won the Ted Bauer Leadership Award. And if I keep naming everything she won, the episode will probably be just about that. So now I want to turn it over to Lola.
Hi, Alejandro. Thanks for having me here. And I'm also very grateful to be on this podcast today.
So one of the things I want to talk about, Lola, you have a really strong presence and your nickname is Unstoppable Lola. Is this something you did on purpose? Did it come naturally? Were you always so determined as a kid?
So first of all, I think it's interesting you said Unstoppable Lola because I didn't know that was my nickname, but I can see how it came up. I've always been known to be driven. It's something that I'm passionate about. With the Bauer MBA program, the way my experience shaped out was that I wanted to get my MBA, but I've also always wanted to be involved. And so I started out the program with the intention to be involved from day one. And so that meant pushing myself beyond just going to classes and just going home afterwards. I am a mom of 2 kids. And when I started the program, I had my boys were 1 and 3 at the time, but I didn't think that would be a deterrent for me to accomplish anything I was trying to accomplish. So I guess you could say I've always been driven. I mean, it's kind of hard to think of myself that way. I just always know that if there's something I wanted to do, I would have to be the one to make that call, make that decision, and make sure it happened. So I guess that's my track record then. That's it.
So you were president of the NAMA chapter, a Bauer MBA ambassador. You were also part of the Bauer MBA Society, and 2 kids, a husband. How do you manage all these different activities? Because I've never heard you say that you don't have enough time. You just manage to do it all. Is there a specific routine that you have? Anything you would like to share with the audience about your process on how to handle all these different activities and how to prioritize?
So that's a fair question. I think on the outside it looks like I'm half crazy, but I'm not. I do like to be busy. I like pushing myself to accomplish as much as I can within the time span. I mean, for me, one of the things that worked was that first and foremost, I had a supporting spouse. And so he knew going in that I wanted to accomplish certain things in the MBA program. And so it was just more of a family decision on how we got that done. Of course, we have young kids, but the goal was to make sure they didn't feel there was a lapse in my absence, or they didn't feel my absence when I wasn't there. And so just setting up the routine at home, again, it was a lot of prep work, quite frankly. I like to cook my kids' meals, and so I still did that. That was just something that was important to me, so that even if I wasn't there, a part of me was still with them. So I would plan my Sundays just cooking and just cooking out for the week or 2 weeks, depending on what the meal was, and thank God there were freezers, right? And then in terms of just juggling everything I was doing on campus, it was, I was a project manager when I started the program, and so there was always that skill set to just be more efficient with my time. But obviously when you come into an MBA program, you kind of have to just hone in on that. And so it took a lot of me saying no to certain things, making trade-offs where I had to. I think you learn very quickly in an MBA program that there isn't enough time to get everything done, and you kind of have to prioritize what you're trying to do. And so I had to learn really quickly what my trade-off's going to be, and also be intentional and be aware of that, because you are making those trade-offs regardless. The question is, are you aware of it or not? So for me, because I had these things I wanted to accomplish throughout the program, I just set out to do it and just realized I had to say no to certain things. It was a lot of social activities, obviously, outside of the program, and just managing my time accordingly.
So I see that there's a very strict process right there. Talking specifically about the meals, because that's something that takes a lot of time.
Yeah.
Did you have any specific meals that you always cooked and just rotated, or did you always try to make something new?
No, I had to become efficient with that process.
Okay.
Obviously, I mean, there wasn't the. Well, first of all, you're dealing with kids, so they're very picky people. So if I wasted my time coming up with different meals, even though I wanted to, I would be it would be very inefficient. So it was more of a rotation. It was just rotating stuff out. It was the simple stuff. And honestly, there's some days when it was pizza night. And actually, that's how pizza night was born in my house, because there were Fridays when I was just tired from the week. And it's something we still do now, but I had to let go of the fact that I'm not always going to be able to cook. And on the days I did cook, one of the things I still make is chicken pot pie. They love it for some reason. I mean, I'm grateful that they do. I actually tried to cheat once and switch it out for a frozen brand, and they called me out on that. And so I had to make sure that I carved out the time, even if that's the one thing I did that week. I had to make sure that was done, because you can freeze that.
Yeah.
So from a process standpoint, I think for me was, if I had to outline how I was able to accomplish that, it was more like realizing I couldn't have that much variety and just sticking to a couple things during the week, and then obviously make that an efficient process where you're just knocking that out every Sunday. That was actually how I did. I couldn't deviate from that because I didn't have the time to deviate. And the goal at the end of the day was to make a home cooked meal so that when I'm not there, they feel their mom was there. And I could still do that if I was efficient about that up front.
Correct. And that's very thoughtful. The thing is that you have a tough crowd because you have two voice, and there's a really interesting video that shows how the difference between boys and girls, that boys have really a lot less empathy than girls, even at a young age.
Oh, really?
So they do this experiment where they bring young boys and they feed them lemonade with salt, and they drink, and it's this lady like, oh, I just make this lemonade just for you. It's special. And they tried it, and they all start making faces like, oh my God, this is the worst lemonade ever. Oh, but I made it just for you. Yeah, but it's bad.
Right.
Just pure honesty. And then they bring girls the same age. They don't even make a face. They're, it's not bad. It could be improved, but we appreciate it. It's just amazing how the difference in empathy at that age. So kudos to you for cooking for a tough crowd.
Well, yeah, thank you.
Expanding a little bit of that on that mindset of organizing yourself, something that I've never seen you do, which I think plays a lot in your character of being unstoppable, is that I've never heard you complain. Ever. I never hear you complain about too many assignments or too many things to do, or I don't know, whatever. And I've known you for a long time, and we've shared a lot. And then some of the people that I just meet once, and all they do is complain. So where do you think this mindset comes from? How do you deal with those obstacles to turn them into opportunities and not just complain about the hard things that life is going to throw at you?
Well, first of all, I think it's very generous of you to say that I don't complain. I think it probably stems in my mind and from my mindset that everything that happens to you, you have a decision, so to speak, along the way. And so to that effect, if you don't like something, then you shouldn't stay in that situation. And so for me, everything that's been put on my plate, I had a say in it coming on my plate. So for me to complain would just not, it just wouldn't add up for me, because somewhere along the line I had a decision to make. Have there been times when it's challenging? I think I actually have to go back to when I started the program. So I had another school in mind that I wanted to get into, and I didn't get into that. And of course I was crushed like any normal person is if they didn't go into the dream school or whatever target they had. But fortunately, I had a good friend who said, well, you got into University of Houston, so why don't you make it what you need it to be? And that was a light bulb. Yes, I was going to have to figure out, because over here I had this school that I had a map for this school, but University of Houston, it was one of those places where I'm like, okay, how am I going to navigate myself through this space? And so when my friend said, well, I know you can do this, make it what you need to be, that was the light bulb moment. And that's what I set out to do. And I had all these concession plans in place. If I couldn't juggle work, school, the kids, I would quit work. Well, obviously that didn't happen. I still worked throughout the program. And I think just having a fail-safe plan was how I was able to get through the program, because every single time an opportunity showed up, I was like, well, if I can't do it, then I'll just do X. But at least I should try. So I was always pushing myself to try. Or there are times when I thought I must be crazy to take this on. But then I was like, well, I'll take it. If I can't do it, I'll just drop one thing. And that was always the equation. And then you find out, you can actually juggle that many balls. I think for me, it turned out to be a blessing. in disguise coming to the University of Houston simply because I wouldn't have pushed myself as hard as I did. It's just as simple as that. I would have probably just actually, the other school, I was going to quit my job and just go to school, and that was it. But with the University of Houston, the blessing in disguise was that I pushed myself to juggle as many responsibilities at the same time. And in that process, you develop yourself, one, and you also discover things about your personality and figure out things to hone in on and things to let go, and which I had to figure that out as well because you're making trade-offs. So, but yeah, I think to answer your question, I think for me, it's just hard. If I made a decision to be involved in anything, then there's just no reason to complain. Period.
I like it. So let's keep the theme talking about obstacle and challenges, because you've told me you've had to overcome some cultural perceptions and gender stereotypes. Would you mind sharing that story with us?
Yeah, sure. So I'm American born, but culturally Nigerian. And so that's a big part of who I am today. I've been fortunate enough to take the merits of both cultures, and that's, again, shaped me into the person I am. But I've also had to be aware of some of the stereotypes in terms of just being a female Nigerian or a female African woman. And one of my close friends, actually, from the MBA program, we're close now, but in the beginning we just met, and he had said, well, who's taking care of your kids? And I'm like, what do you mean? I have a spouse. He can take care of them. And he's like, okay. And that was at the beginning of the program. And so I'm thinking, okay, that's a weird comment, but you get past that. You keep going through. And then a year later, I'm now the president of the National Association of Women MBA. And he's like, I am so proud of you. You can do X, Y, Z. And I said, well, yeah, that was the plan. It has nothing to do with the fact that I'm a woman. It's just when you set out to do something, you get it done. And the one part that probably made me proud in that was when he said, I never thought you could do that in the beginning, because he just did not see it. He didn't see how that was possible. And so for me to somewhat become an example of just, I guess in a way, just me showing up in Bauer was a way to break down a stereotype from a cultural perspective. And that meant a lot to me, quite frankly, because that means I was breaking down just the female bias, but also just showing that my spouse, my husband, could also step up and be a dad and be involved with his kids. And that was part of the reason why I got through the program, and he worked. A lot of people thought my husband didn't work for some reason. I don't know why they thought that, because I was always on campus. I'm like, my husband works, but again, you just figure out a structure that works for everyone. So that was a great experience for me, because I think I killed two birds with one stone. I broke down a female stereotype, but also highlighted the fact that men can be equally supportive of the wives.
Correct. Just making it happen. Now we're going to take a short break, and we'll come back with how does she do it.
Bauer College's executive education program is training business professionals and leaders to tackle the challenges of tomorrow. Courses in consulting, strategy, analytics, project management, and more, led by Bauer's award-winning faculty. Find open enrollment programs at bauer.uh.edu/exec.
And we're back with Lola. I want to expand a little bit on that gender stereotypes, because the other day we were having lunch and you shared with me a really interesting story. We were talking about an experience you had at your job, and it blew my mind how little I knew about being in your shoes. And I thought I knew a lot because I was raised mainly by my mom, who's divorced, my aunt, who's divorced too, my grandma, who's a widow, and most of my cousins, my Venezuelan cousins, are women, the only guys here in the United States. So I grew up around a lot of women, and I thought I had a lot of that perspective into my mindset. And then you shared with me the story about that you had to fire somebody, and I never thought it from your perspective. So would you mind sharing a little bit of that story with you and what happened?
Yeah, sure. So I think it's probably important to just set up the story a little bit. So I recently transitioned from a project management job in the food industry to a private equity real estate firm as a director. So it's a leadership role. And of course, that in itself is challenging, but you have to be grateful for an MBA to make that transition. And so I knew that going in, that was going to be challenging, because I'm stepping out of my comfort zone, which is something that I would preach day in and day out, is always to push yourself and just try the things that blow your mind away, because that's how you grow and that's how you develop. So this is a private equity real estate firm. It's a startup. It's a 3-year-old startup. That was part of the reason why it was appealing to me. And so in that realm, obviously every single infrastructure is not in place. And so I had this task where I had to fire someone that I had hired. And, within a couple of weeks, we realized it wasn't going to be a good fit. And I'm also a believer of you fail fast, you fail forward, right? So you just get on with it, and just as opposed to prolonging the pain. And so I was talking to a friend of mine that, this is going to be my first fire in this company. And just talking about, we made this call, we probably shouldn't have made this call, just going through that back and forth. And then she was like, how about your safety? And I'm like, what do you mean? And I never even thought about my safety because, I didn't know, I just didn't even think about it. It just didn't cross my mind. And I realized quickly that because we're a startup, we didn't have all the infrastructure in place to make sure that you're safe as a woman, quite frankly. And if anything went awry, you had security guards or whatever. You had an exit strategy, basically. So obviously we didn't have that. So I had to become very creative. But I think the lesson there is that sometimes there are so the one part too is that, and then I spoke to a female friend who highlighted the fact that I was a woman firing someone, and I spoke to a male friend who also highlighted the fact that I was a woman. But his perspective was, you should get the CEO to do it because it's not safe. So both parties were talking from an angle of safety, but one person's solution was get a man to figure it out. And of course, I had a different reaction there. And I said, well, this is my team. I hired this person, so I think I can clean up my own mess, right? And so obviously that was a conversation that went sideways. And I think the lesson for us as a startup was that we, didn't have the infrastructure in place in case something went awry, because you never know what's going to go wrong. There's a reason why the big companies have all this procedure when they fire people. They do the walkouts and all that, but we didn't have that plan in place. And so I had to become creative. And so I still had to fire the person, but I also stayed really close to the door in case I needed to jet out. So I think the lesson there, and I think what you enjoyed in that story was that sometimes as a man, you just forget that there are just additional risks that we take as women. However, I don't want that to be a limiting factor. I think it's just more of an awareness and just being, of course, quite frankly, it could happen to a man. It could be a bigger man. He could take down a younger guy, which I know you kind of said, I guess I'll think about my safety was a football player type build. But I think I definitely am not sharing that story to say that women can't obviously take care of themselves, but I think it's more to highlight that sometimes, regardless of how insightful you might be as a man, there are just some things you're just going to miss because you're not in our shoes. And we have to become creative. We're the ones who are the gatekeepers of the solution. And that's actually how it started. I just said, hey, guys, I realized this is a huge gap in our hiring process and firing process. And it showed itself because I was a woman doing this job. And so just moving forward, we probably should have X, Y, Z in place. And that's how you make changes, quite frankly. So sometimes you just have to go through certain things to highlight a problem and come up with a solution.
Correct. And also probably another lesson is to have lunch with your friends who are leading and making changes, to learn from them and expand your mindsets thanks to that. Because it blew my mind how when you told it, I was like, there's this whole new level of risk that I never think about. So thank you for sharing that, Lola.
No problem.
Now, let's dive a little bit deeper into how to be unstoppable. Do you have any particular routines? Do you meditate? Do you journal? Do you do exercise? Like, what's the be unstoppable like Lola routine?
That is funny. I guess for me, the big thing is your mindset. Everything stems from that space. So I'm very intentional about the people I keep myself around. Obviously, you're one of those people in my close-knit circle, but I'm very intentional about the people in my circle. I'm intentional about the content that I consume. I mean, for me, I enjoy inspirational quotes, and so I love the pictorial stuff you find on Instagram or Pinterest. And sometimes you just wake up and you just need that burst of inspiration to get about your day. I'm a big fan of podcasts. I love listening to How I Built It and Lois House, and obviously how she does it. Because for me, it's very inspiring to hear other people's stories and just listen to how people overcome challenges in their day-to-day activities. I also am a big fan of Shark Tank. Again, it's a space that I love to be in. It's a problem-solving space. If that's the trend, actually. because it's all about founder stories and then how they got through those hurdles. That's the reason why the current job I'm in was so appealing, because it's still a startup and it's still very entrepreneurial, and you get to be part of that building process. So I am a huge consumer of the fluffy stuff for some people. I guess the inspirational quotes, the Shark Tank shows, the people I hang with. I can go on and on about podcasts and the content that you hear from that. And that's important to me. I think you just have to guard your mindset if you're trying to accomplish certain things. I think, obviously, that doesn't mean that I don't watch, other things. I do. That's my downtime. But I think on a day-to-day basis, it's constantly going through the podcast is probably big because of my commute, quite frankly. And then also just the stuff that I read, the business books that I read. I read a lot of magazines like Success and Fast Company and Inc. That's just the stuff that drives me. And I read a lot of entrepreneurial books or strategy books. Again, that's just the mindset that I love to be in. But that doesn't mean I don't like to have fun. I do.
What would be, no specific order or ranking, but what are the top 3 books that you've read lately that you would like to recommend to the audience?
Oh, wow. I'm currently reading a book called The 10% Entrepreneur. And the reason why that appealed to me was because I had actually resigned from my job as a project manager to become an entrepreneur. And so when this opportunity showed up, I struggled with making the transition back into working for someone. And then I found this book. So I'm always looking for a book to help me in the next step, right? And I found this book that basically said you can do both. You can work with someone and still do your own thing on the side, which I knew that, but I just thought I was selling out being an entrepreneur, right? So that's actually the book that I read probably in the last 2 months. And right now I'm reading a lot of real estate books because of my job. And so that's the space I'm in, because I need to excel, because I took on a challenge and I want to do well in that role. So I think to answer your question, my last 2 books would be 2 real estate. I'm in the real estate space, so that's what I'm consuming right now. But also I have my 10% entrepreneur book on my nightstand, and then I have my podcast as well. I do a lot of podcasts because it's just more convenient, quite frankly, just in the way you can consume that content.
Any other resource, any other gadget or apps that you use on your phone to stay organized and to keep everything on track that you would like to share with the audience?
Yes, I use Evernote a lot. Mm-hmm. I'm a fan of Evernote because you can download a lot of thoughts and just capture a lot of content that way. I'm a big fan of Medium. Again, that's something that if I'm trying to pick up my kids and I'm waiting, I can get a 5-minute blog and just, again, feed my mindset that way. Those are probably my Instagram it depends on the time of the day. Sometimes I get the inspirational stuff, and sometimes it's just the fluffy stuff, quite frankly, just the laughs. Those are probably the things you'll find on my phone. It's Evernote, just in terms of keeping myself organized. Obviously, my calendar is important, just syncing that through. There's one called Fantastical that syncs up all your calendars, and so that's what I'm trying out right now. I'm always looking for something to optimize my time, but those are some of the tools that I use on a daily basis.
I want to take a little bit of a left turn here and bring the conversation back to something else that we have in common, which is the MBA journey. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of misconceptions about what an MBA program is. So would you share a little bit of your experience of what you thought the MBA was before starting and what your thought of it is now that you've finished it?
That's a good question. So I think prior to starting, I just knew there was going to be a lot of work. That's what you hear, and it is a lot of work. But I didn't know how many opportunities would present themselves, especially if you show up. I just wasn't aware of the number of opportunities that would present themselves in the program. Obviously, completing the program, you look back and you're like, wow, that was a heck of a ride, and which I'm grateful for, because again, like I said in the beginning, I pushed myself beyond the limits that I thought I was capable of. I think and I decided to do that from day one. So it's almost like I intentionally went in knowing I was going to be involved because I didn't want to know any different. Otherwise, you won't be able to plug in, quite frankly, at the level you would. And I will always like to tell people that if you're going to go for an MBA program, you should strive to extract every ounce of knowledge, not just the academics piece, but also the networking piece in that, because that's how you have an enriching or a more fulfilling experience in the program.
If you would recommend, what would you say to somebody who's starting their MBA journey right now? What would be the the 1 or 3 things you would tell them, hey, focus on this, this, and this, so you can make the most out of your MBA journey?
I think, obviously, I think before you start the program, you should have an idea of what you're trying to accomplish. I think that's very important. The one thing I knew I wanted to accomplish at the end of the road was having more options. I wasn't necessarily sure what options out, but I wanted to put myself in a situation where I'd created a lot more options than I had before I started. And I would say if you have an idea of where you're trying to go, just an idea, that just helps, quite frankly, when you have things present themselves in the program, you kind of know which way to go. Because there's a lot of things that are going to come at you when you come into an MBA program. And it's a very short amount of time. It looks like a long time, but it really is short because you just have to keep going through it. So I think one thing is obviously figure out what you're trying to do. The next thing once you get into the program is get organized. You have to get organized. Otherwise, you fall behind on everything, on life, on things you're trying to get done. I mean, time becomes this entity that, quite frankly, I have a much deeper appreciation of time. Going through the MBA program, I think you become more sensitive when people are wasting your time. Let me put it that way. Mm-hmm. And so, because you're trying to get stuff done. And I think that's something that if you're organized, you can kind of structure what you need to do and get it done in a timely manner. And then the third thing I would say is just have fun and try and extract again, it goes back to just making the best of the opportunity and doing everything you can to make sure you're getting every single value out of the program, because that's why you're here. You don't want to go through it halfway and look back and realize I probably could have done more. And so I would say show up. That's one thing. I think that's how Unstoppable came up in Namba, was I was always big on just showing up. If you showed up, that's half of the battle right there.
So Lola, where can people find you? Let's say somebody wants to ask you maybe a recipe about what you were cooking Sundays, or one of the books you're reading, or the podcast. Where can people have a conversation with you and share a little bit and ask some more questions if they have more questions for you?
Sure. I'm on Twitter, and so my name's Lola Soyebo Harris, so you can find me that way. I'm also on Instagram, which is lola.s.h, and those are 2 platforms that I try to... Those are my 2 social media platforms. I am on Facebook, but I can't say I'm doing Facebook justice, quite frankly. And thank goodness you can feed Facebook through Instagram. But those are the 2 ways to connect with me, and obviously we can start a conversation that way.
Thank you for being here with us, Lola. We hope you had a great time and everybody listening. So that's it for this episode.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Working Wisdom podcast series from the CT Bauer College of Business, brought to you by the Working Families Initiative. The initiative aims to provide support and access for women in business school and the workforce, and to generate research that organizations can use to implement policies and standards to benefit a diverse workforce. For more information about Bauer College and this podcast series, visit www.bauer.uh.edu/podcast.